نعوذ به من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا إنه من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبد الله ورسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم أما بعد. And this is our sixth lesson on the shurut La ilaha illallah and the conditions of La ilaha illallah. And I posted some poetry to my Telegram just now for the people listening online, for those present here, if you want to read along. The last two lines of which one should memorize. And they summarize the seven conditions. And I brought the lengthier part of the passage here just to emphasize the meaning of what is being said. It's a very beautiful poem called Sulam al-Wusul by the great scholar Hafiz ibn Ahmed ibn Ali al-Hakami, rahimahullah ta'ala, who died in the year 1377 after the hijrah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. As one of the poems that our scholars advise, beginning and intermediate level students to memorize. He says, rahmatullahi alayhi, about Tawheed, about the oneness of Allah tabarak wa ta'ala, وَقَدْ حَوَتْهُ أي حوت التوحيد وقد حوته لفظة الشهادة فهي سبيل الفوز وسعادة. That the phrase of the testimony, the wording of the testimony, La ilaha illallah, encompasses and covers over monotheism. That's the subject matter of the Shahada, is Tawheed. Subject matter of the Shahada is Tawheed, to single out Allah with His divinity and Godhood, and to single out Allah with His right to be worshipped. And so the phrase of the testimony encompasses it, meaning Tawheed. فَهِيَ سَبِيلُ الْفَوْزِ وَسَعَادَةِ. It is a path of success and happiness. مَنْ قَالَهَا مُعْتَقِدًا مَعْنَاهَا وَكَانَ عَامِلًا بِمُقْتَضَاهَا. Whoever says it, believing in its meaning, and acts according to its implications. So you have two things here, which is believing, which is called aqidah, mu'taqidan, having aqidah, having one's heart tied to its meaning. وَكَانَ عَامِلًا بِمُقْتَضَاهَا, while acting according to its implications, meaning with inqiyad, with tasdeeq and inqiyad, as we mentioned before. All these conditions go back to a tasdeeq with inqiyad, what the Salaf in great detail wrote in their writings about Iman being statement and action, the statement of the heart and the action of the heart, the statement of the limbs, or the statement of the tongue and the actions of the limbs, and how the asl of it is what is in the heart of submission, which is the statement of the heart, or submission, which is the action of the heart, that comes as a result of one's belief, tasdeeq, which is the statement of the heart. He says, whoever says it believing in its meaning, while acting upon its implications, fil qawli wal fi'li wa kana mu'minan, in both word and deed, meaning that they utter the statement and that they act physically upon what they have believed and complied with, that they worship Allah tabarak wa ta'ala, and outwardly and inwardly, yub'athu yawm al-hashri najin aminan, then this person will be resurrected on the day of judgment safe and secure. فَإِنَّ مَعْنَهَا الَّذِي عَلَيْهِ دَلَتْ يَقِينًا وَهَدَتْ إِلَيْهِ, because its true, genuine meaning of La ilaha illallah, to which it certainly points and guides to, أَن لَيْسَ بِالْحَقِّ إِلَهٌ يُعْبَدُ إِلَّا الْإِلَهُ الْوَاحِدُ الْمُنْفَرِدُ, is that La ilaha illallah means La ma'buda haqqun illallah. La ma'buda haqqun illallah, that there is no ma'bud, truthfully, genuinely, there is nothing that is authentically and genuinely worshipped and deserving of worship as a deity other than Allah. That there is no deity, true deity worthy of worship except for the one God, the unique, and He was unlike anything else in His names, His attributes, His actions, and His right to be worshipped. بالخلق والرزق وبالتدبير جل عن الشريك والنذير, who is alone and exclusive in creating everything, providing for everything, and managing and controlling the affairs of everything. That is called rububiyyah, creating, providing, and managing. Exalted is He above having any partner equal, meaning and what he does and who he is, or in what he deserves as a result of that, which is his right to be worshipped. تبارك وتعالى وبشروط سبعة قد قيدت وفي نصوص الوحي حقا وردت. And it is bound, the statement is bound by 7 conditions, 7 stipulations, 7 duties, 7 things that are the core and the essence of what it means to say La ilaha illallah, that a person must have all 7 of true about them for them to be a believer, that are the core faith, the bare minimum for a person to be a believer. And as we said, that these 7 things go back to 2 concepts, which are belief and compliance. Belief and compliance, tasdeeq and inqiyad, as was alluded to in this poetry and as we mentioned in the previous classes. Because all the religion is, who knows, it is either this or that. Anything that you read in Quran and Sunnah is either information or what? It's either information, meaning information about Allah and the hereafter, and the stories of the prophets and so on and so forth. So it's reports, information, or it is commandments, laws, right? Laws, commandments, prohibitions, laws. So information that comes from the one that there is no one truer than was Allah. And the human being that was the most truthful human being sent by Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala, which is Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, must be believed, and laws must be complied with. So all of Islam, this is the core of Islam. Even if a person doesn't do what they comply with, but they believe that it is something that they must comply with, that will make them a weak believer, but it does not remove them. That's why sins don't remove a person from Islam. But they must respond to the information with belief and to the laws with compliance. And it's impossible for a person who truly believes and has truly complied inwardly to do nothing. Right? That's impossible. You don't find a person who just doesn't do anything of Islam who you would say that they're Muslim. Right? But generally, people are on different levels according to their level of obedience or disobedience as their level of faith. But as long as they have this, which is the core faith, which is that they accept and comply with the commands of Allah Ta'ala, even if they are weak in implementing them or lazy in implementing them, and they believe in everything that Allah and the Prophet ﷺ said, and that person is a believer. That is what's called Aslul Iman. That is Aqallu Wajib. That is the bare minimum of what makes a person a Muslim. So these 7 conditions that we're going to hear, we've connected them already, and we'll go back and connect them to these 2 things of belief and submission, inshallah ta'ala. And they are deduced from and taken out with much proof and much evidence from the Book of Allah and the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the order here, there's different orders that were given by the scholars, as we mentioned, the sequence of the conditions, as I mentioned, by the scholars, starting with Abdul Rahman ibn Hassan ibn Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, the grandson of Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, in his writings, and then Sulaiman ibn Sahman, and then Hafid Hakami, and a number of scholars after them, and who brought out these 7 conditions as a further elaboration of the core of faith, of the conditions of La ilaha illallah. These 7 conditions, they apply to both shahadas. La ilaha illallah, Muhammad Rasulullah, they have the same conditions, right? And they are, as he says here, and it will be beneficial to memorize them. He said, وَبِشُرُوطٍ سَبْعَةٍ قَدْ قُيِّدَتْ وَفِي نُصُوصِ الْوَحْيِ حَقًّا وَرَدَتْ فَإِنَّهُ لَمْ يَنْتَفِعْ قَائِلُهَا بِالنُّطْقِ إِلَّا حَيْثُ يَسْتَكْمِلُهَا. He says, and it is bound by 7 conditions that are truly mentioned in the text of the Revelation, the Quran, the Sunnah. فَإِنَّهُ لَمْ يَنْتَفِعْ قَائِلُهَا, because the person who utters the statement, La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, will not benefit from what they said, بِالنُّطْقِ, or what they just utter with their tongue, إِلَّا حَيْثُ يَسْتَكْمِلُهَا, unless they fulfill all of these. Unless they fulfill all of these. العلم واليقين والقبول والانقياد فادر ما أقول الصدق والإخلاص والمحبة والصدق والإخلاص والمحبة وفقك الله لما أحب. I remember, as long as I can remember, almost as long as I've been Muslim, I remember memorizing these being very young. I remember watching children in the masajid all across this country memorize these 7 lines of poetry, or these 2 lines of poetry that contain these 7 conditions of La ilaha illallah. They're very easy to memorize. You have them in front of you in your free time. Go back to them. Alhamdulillah, I remember Germantown Masjid, a bunch of the children had memorized this, recording with the children reciting this. You could probably find on social media. This is something very common for people of all ages to memorize. these 7 conditions in this way. He says, Al-ilmu wal-yaqinu wal-qabulu, knowledge, certainty, and acceptance. Wal-inqiyadu fadri ma aqulu, and compliance, so understand and comprehend what I am saying. Was-sidqu wal-ikhlasu wal-mahabba, and truthfulness, and ikhlas and sincerity, wal-mahabba, and love. وَفَّقَكَ اللَّهُ لِمَا أَحَبَّ, may Allah guide you to what He loves. May Allah guide you to what He loves. Okay, let's do something real quick here. Now we have 2 things that all of Islam is built upon, the bare minimum of Islam, right? The bare minimum of Islam, and they are, as we said, belief and compliance. Belief and compliance. So belief and compliance, this is how you divide these 7 things between belief and compliance, right? Compliance is obvious, right? Inqiyad is right there in the conditions, right? And inqiyad. So you have belief and compliance. Belief and compliance. The word for belief is tasdeeq. Tasdeeq, right? So tasdeeq, you could say, is ilm, yaqeen, qabul, and sidq. And sidq. To the point that most of the statements of the scholars in explaining at-tasdeeq quote the exact hadith that we're going to hear. Man qala la ilaha illallah sadiqan min qalbihi. Whoever says la ilaha illallah truthfully with his heart. And he adds the strongest evidences for a tasdeeq. A tasdeeq is something that is generally accepted by the Muslims. The only people who said about the definition of iman that it is not tasdeeq, and were the Jahmiyyah. Jahmiyyah said the ilm is enough. The ilm is enough. It's just enough to know. So if a person just knew the truth, that would make them a believer. That would make Iblis and Fir'aun believers. And many of the disbelieving nations who جَحَدُوا بِهَا وَاسْتَيْقَنَتْهَا أَنفُسُهُم ظُلْمًا وَعُلُوًّا, who rejected the message even though they had certainty about it. That would make them believers too. So it's not enough to know, but you have to know with certainty. That removes doubt. And you have to accept it as being the truth. And you have to be truthful in uttering it. You have to be truthful when you say it from your heart. Sadiqan min qalbihi, as we'll hear, inshallah ta'ala, hadith. Whoever says this, sadiqan min qalbihi, from his heart, truthful from his heart, not truthful from his tongue. He's saying it with his tongue, truthful from his heart. So here we see that sidq is amalun qalbi, and it is something halun qalbi. It is a state of the heart. It is a state of the heart, something that must happen in the heart. So what's left after that? You have ilm, yaqeen, qabul, and sidq, which are all tasdeeq. All of these things combined are tasdeeq. Right? So how many are left? 3. So there are 3 left, and they are inqiyad, compliance. We already said sidq. Compliance. The other 2 are descriptions of how this compliance is supposed to be. Right? So they are compliance, sincerity, and love. Compliance, sincerity, and love. So what belief means is that a person knows, has certainty, accepts, and affirms the truthfulness of La ilaha illallah, which is tasdeeq. And what results from that is that they comply sincerely out of love for Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala and worship. That is La ilaha illallah. Those are 7 conditions between tasdeeq and inqiyad, between tasdeeq and inqiyad, between the action of the heart and the statement of the heart, between the belief of the heart and the what that brings about in the heart of compliance. What that brings in the heart of compliance. And so, let me go to the resource that you have. You guys have a copy of the PDF with you? I have a different, so I've been editing this, so my pages are much different. We're on condition number. So we covered truthfulness last week, and we'll just recap a little bit. In the hadith of Mu'adh, radiallahu anhu, the Prophet ﷺ, he said, "Ma min ahadin yashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa anna Muhammadan Rasulullah sidqan min qalbihi illa harramahu Allahu ala an-nar." This hadith is in Bukhari and Muslim. This particular wording is in Bukhari and Muslim. There are about 6 different hadith that are very similar in wording that were said at different times by the Prophet ﷺ, and they have almost identical wording but slightly different wording that pretty much give the same meaning. And that there is no one who testifies that La ilaha illallah, that there is no deity in truth except for Allah, and that Muhammad is a messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, sadiqan, or it says here sidqan min qalbihi, truthfully from the heart, illa haramahu Allahu ala nar, except that Allah forbids him to the fire. Allah will make him haram to the fire. The truthfulness is another way to translate truthfulness, sidq, right? Trueness is something that is not just in, it is not just in belief, it is something that is what holds all these conditions together. It is the most important of these conditions, as a matter of fact. It is in statement, it is in belief, it is in action, it is in your hal, in your entire way that you are, in your being, your condition, your overall state of being. And as a believer, the most important description of the believer is sidq. Is trueness and truthfulness and authenticity. The opposite of that is kadhib. Linguistically and religiously, the opposite of that, the asl of iman, the scholars they say, all of iman is built upon truthfulness. And all of nifaq is built upon kadhib, upon lying. There's nothing that is more antithetical, that is more difficult or odious or destructive for a person to have of a flaw than an kadhib, than lying and dishonesty. There's nothing that goes against being a believer more than that is more likely to lead a person into hypocrisy in statement and hypocrisy in aqidah that takes him out of the fold of Islam than being a liar. And so the problem with the liar is that they start to believe their own lies and they start to think that reality bends to their whims. As was explained in detail by Ibn Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala, and the liar, and he convinces other people to what they believe, and to the point that they start to believe it themselves. And so al-kadhib, the worst lie being al-kadhib ala Allah, al-qawlu ala Allah bila ilm. Speaking about Allah without knowledge is lying upon Allah. Speaking about the religion without knowledge is the most destructive sin after kufr and shirk. It's the most destructive sin after kufr and shirk, and the most likely sin to destroy a person. Every type of ta'wilun batil is kadhib. Every type of false interpretation of Islam, of misrepresenting the meanings of what Allah said and the Prophet ﷺ, is a form of lying upon Allah. For this reason, the Salaf, they said, al-bid'a baridul kufr wa shirk, that innovation leads a person, it is a herald, and it announces the approach of kufr and shirk. Innovation leads people to kufr and shirk. Why? Because it is al-qawlu ala Allah bila ilm, it is al-kadhib ala Allah, al-iftira ala Allah. It is lying upon Allah, fabricating against Allah, tabarak wa ta'ala. What could be more destructive than that? And so al-kadhib, and he is at the core of the major sins. Al-kadhib is the main cause of innovation. Al-kadhib is the core of nifaqun akbar i'tiqadi mukhrij min al-millah, and you have major nifaq in creed and belief that expels a person from Islam. Al-kadhib, and lying is at the core of all shirk with Allah tabarak wa ta'ala and all kufr. It is the source of all evil on the face of the earth. There's a source of all evil on the face of the earth. Just as knowledge and truth is the source of all good, and guidance and the revelation is the source of all good, then the opposite of that, which is al-kadhib, and he is the source of all evil. Is the source of all evil. وفي حديث العربي الذي جاء إلى النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم يسأل عن أركان الإسلام. He said, likewise in the hadith of the Arabi, of the Bedouin, who came to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, asking about the pillars of Islam, التي أعظمها هذه الكلمة, and the greatest of which is this statement, لا إله إلا الله, And the Prophet ﷺ لما أخبره النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم بذلك قال هل علي غيرها. And the Prophet ﷺ told him about the 5 pillars of Islam. He said, is there anything else upon me? Anything else binding upon me? Obligatory upon me? The Prophet ﷺ, he said, لا. He said, no. إلا أن تتوع. He said, إلا أن تتوع. Hey, I need this tie here. It says تتتوع. تتتوع. Right? Unless you want to volunteer. You do things voluntarily. And if you want to do extra, then do extra. Otherwise, there's nothing obligatory upon you except for these 5 things. قال والله لا أزيد عليها ولا أنقص. He said, I swear by Allah, I will not increase or decrease in this. Meaning from acts of worship, are anything obligatory except for these things. A person will say, what about all the matters of good character and ethics and morality and so on and so forth? Is the excuse from that? Those things are fitra on the people. And this was from the core of the da'wah of the Prophet ﷺ that he was able to call people to Islam with. And that he called them to what they were already doing. He called them to what they already valued. He called them to kindness to their parents and truthfulness and integrity and generosity and bravery and so on and so forth. And those things come natural for people. But as it comes to, as far as it goes, as far as acts of worship and beliefs are concerned, all of belief and all of acts of worship go back to the statement La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah and the other 4 pillars of Islam. And the other 4 pillars of Islam. And so the Prophet ﷺ, he said, إِلَّا أَن تَتَوَّعْ, and not unless you volunteer to do more. قَالَ وَاللَّهِ لَا أَزِيدُ عَلَيْهَا وَلَا أَنْقُصُ. He said, I swear by Allah, I won't do any more or less. I'm going to do that. I'm going to do that. I won't do any more or less. فقال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم أفلح إن صدق. أفلح إن صدق. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, أفلح, he is successful if he is truthful. If he is truthful. So this is the shahid, if he is truthful. So long as he is sadiq in what he is saying, meaning from his heart, he is saying something with his tongue, and his heart is behind what he is saying. And his heart is behind what he is saying, then he will be successful. He will be successful. As we mentioned before, that sidq is something that is in the heart of a person. And is the state of being of a person, and the authentic, genuine person. And if he is truthful, the person who is real about La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, and the person who is real about his Islam and building his Islam upon the 5 pillars of faith and establishing them as Allah is obligated, as the Prophet ﷺ explained. And then he's going to be genuine in his condition. That's on different levels. He's going to be genuine in fulfilling this. He's going to be genuine and true in fulfilling this. So sidq here, and he is just bigger than, and he is believing it to be true in his heart. And if he is truthful, if he is true and genuine, meaning if he is truthful, if he is true and genuine, we mentioned last week something in this statement is in the book Alam Sunnah al-Manshura by the author Hafidh ibn Ahmed al-Hakimi rahimahullah ta'ala, and where he his 200 questions and answers in Aqidah, where he explains what Ibn Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala in his writings explain from the statements of the early Salaf, and that sidq, it comprises of 2 things. Sidq in action and behavior, in carrying out actions. Trueness in carrying out actions. So here we see that trueness can be connected to actions, so sidq can also be a description of inqiyad, of compliance, which the scholars call tahqiq al-iman. Tahqiq al-iman. Put a pin in that statement. Tahqiq al-iman. It's at-tasdiq al-amali. It's actualizing, proving the trueness of what you say with your behavior. Put a pin in that statement. What this means, the scholars, they call different names. Sometimes it is called sidq, sometimes it is called azima. It all means the same thing. It is your determination. It is the determination that you have, the enthusiasm that you have about Islam. And so a person's enthusiasm, people's enthusiasm, yatafawat, and it fluctuates. It's individual. His enthusiasm goes up and down. A community, their enthusiasm goes up and down. And there are some times of the year where you're more enthused than other times. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, "Inna li kulli shay'in shirra, wa inna li kulli amalin shirratan, wa li kulli shirratin fatratan." That indeed every action has a time of shirra and a time of fatra. A time of shirra meaning a time of nashat, a time of high energy. You're enthused. And everything that is like that has a time of fatra, a time of da'af, a time of weakness. People, they go up and down. Communities, they go up and down. Uh, Sometimes of the year, a person has more time, a person has more energy, or whatever. Ramadan, and the season of Hajj, other times, a person is more enthused than other times. That's natural for a person to not always be on one level. To not always be on one level. But that is what is meant by azima. Hafiz Hakimi said what is meant by azima, and Ibn Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala, and others from the scholars like Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala, and Al-Hafiz Ibn Rajab al-Hanbali rahimahullah ta'ala, in his explanation of the hadith of Shaddad ibn Aus, Allahumma inni as'aluka thabata fil amr wal azimata ala rushd. Oh Allah, I ask you for determination upon Islam and for determination upon guidance. And they explain that this azima, that this sidq, it is two things. It is that a person cuts out distractions and laziness. It is tark al-tawani wal-kasal wal-iltifat ila siwa ma kunta fihi. And being distracted. And he is to cut out laziness, distractions, and complacency and everything of the sort. Anything that stops you from taking action. And it is to give your is badal juhd. Then secondly, to give your best effort. And to try. To actually try. Right? So we always tell our children, especially as they get older, when they said, I'm gonna try such and such, I'm gonna try such and such, you say there's no try, it's just do. Just do. Just do it. Right? So that a person implements it, they act, that they give their best effort. They put their best foot forward. That is what sidq is. Right? So the more a person has of sidq, the higher their iman is going to be. That is called by the scholars tahqiq al-iman. That is why Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala, He described the believers on three different levels in Surah Fatir. Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, He said, ثُمَّ أَوْرَثْنَا الْكِتَابَ الَّذِينَ اصْطَفَيْنَا مِنْ عِبَادِنَا فَمِنْهُمْ ظَالِمٌ لِنَفْسِهِ وَمِنْهُمْ مُقْتَصِدٌ وَمِنْهُمْ سَابِقٌ بِالْخَيْرَاتِ بِإِذْنِ اللَّهِ. That Allah caused this scripture to be inherited by those that He chose specially from His servants. And He mentioned that these people from this ummah, that Allah caused to be the inheritors of the legacy of Islam that the previous messengers came with, that was completed by Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam when he was sent as a prophet, that they are on three different levels. فَمِنْهُمْ ظَالِمٌ لِنَفْسِهِ. From them are those who wrong their own souls. The scholars, they say, some of the scholars, they send the books of tafsir, that Allah began by mentioning those that are special and chosen by Him, by mentioning the worst of the three categories, who are those who oppose, those who wrong their own souls with sin and disobedience. They said that this makes هذه أرجى آية في كتاب الله. That this verse is the greatest cause of hope in the book of Allah. That Allah said about those people who wrong their souls with sin and disobedience, who don't do the mandatory acts to the level that they are required, and don't leave off the forbidden acts as are required, and who do not rush to tawbah, who delay tawbah and do not rush to seek forgiveness from their sins and repent from their shortcomings. That is the zalimi nafsi, the scholars have said. That's what is meant by the person who opposes himself, the person whose bad deeds outweigh his good deeds. And huwa tahta mashi'atillah, that if he was to die in this condition, he will be under the will of Allah. In sha'a adaba wa in sha'a afa anhu. If Allah willed, He would forgive him and pardon him. If Allah will, He'll punish him in the hereafter, because his bad deeds outweigh his good deeds. But this person is still a believer, right? This person is still a believer. The second category, وَمِنْهُمْ مُقْتَصِدٌ. From them are those upon iqtisad. Iqtisad is to have a sustainable practice of worship, to be doing the mandatory acts and staying away from the forbidden acts, and to have that as your routine, so that you do not, that you're moderate, you're not doing more than you should be doing. You have a sustainable practice of worship. You are doing what is required of you, that sort of thing, but you are not being negligent at the same time. But you are not excelling. You are not an exceptional believer at the same time. You are generally a good Muslim, but you are from Ashab al-Yamin, but you are not from as-Sabiqun, right? You're not from the highest levels, those who race towards goodness, right? وَمِنْهُمْ سَابِقٌ لِلْخَيْرَاتِ بِإِذْنِ اللَّهِ. And from them are those who rush to good. bi-idhnillah, by the permission of Allah. The Salaf, they said, the early scholars, they pointed out, and the scholars that have tafsir after them pointed out, that Allah here, He says something to humble those people. When you see yourself, or a person sees herself, rushing past everybody else with knowledge or action, or recitation of the Quran, or worship, or anything of the sort, or the ability to spend their money and generosity and so on and so forth more than other people, or bravery or courage more than other people, and you're not caring and fearing about the blame of the blamers when it comes to Allah and the religion of Allah and so on and so forth, that the person, they have that type of drive and that type of zeal and that type of trueness about themselves. Allah said, bi-idhnillah, that they do that by the permission of Allah. Meaning that had it not been for Allah, they would not be like that. And he daf'an al-ujub, they said, and to repel conceit from the person. To know that anybody who is like that, that is only bi-idhnillah, by the permission of Allah, that they can be like that. It's only by the permission of Allah that they can be like that. So we see here, the scholars, they call this at-tafawud fi tahqiq al-iman, any discrepancy or variation or fluctuation as it relates to tahqiq al-iman, actualizing faith, actualizing belief and compliance, which is a core of faith, actualizing the core of faith, by truthfulness in speech, which includes anything of trueness that a person says with their tongue, reciting the Quran, teaching beneficial knowledge, commanding the good, forbidding the evil, advising for the sake of Allah, tabarak wa ta'ala, saying kind words to bring happiness to the heart of the Muslim. Anything that a person says of truthfulness with his tongue, this is the mab'ath for that, or this is the ba'ith rather for that. Motivation, what drives a person to be like that is his aqidah, his beliefs. Right, his beliefs and what comes of as a result of his belief of his loving, sincere compliance. His loving, sincere compliance. His loving, sincere compliance. Tayyib. And so people comply on different levels, and people believe on different levels, and people speak the truth on different levels. And this is called sidq. This is called sidq. All of Islam is built upon sidq, upon this trueness. This trueness is on different levels. It is on different levels. Just like anything else from these pillars that preceded it, or these, because sometimes they're called pillars, and sometimes they're called furud, as we mentioned before, the duties of the shahada. Sometimes they're called pillars of the shahada. Sometimes they are called other names, as we mentioned before in the previous classes, in the writings of the scholars, but they all go back to the same thing. The essential descriptions of the shahada that must be there for a person to be, for the shahada to be accepted. Right, that these things must be worked on a regular basis. A person, connected to his inqiyad. Some of the scholars like Abdurrahman al-Muallimi and others, they said is what is called al-iltizam, al-iltizam, and is another way that they describe inqiyad, compliance. Iltizam is to stick with it. How long? How long do you stick with it? Right, until you die. Right, you have a niyyah, abadiyah, continuous intention that needs to be renewed, and needs to be strengthened, needs to be fortified, and so on and so forth. Tayyib. And so this trueness and this veracity, just like everything else, just like knowledge, which is the first condition of La ilaha illallah, it can be something broad and vague and poorly defined, but just enough for a person to be a Muslim. Or it could be that a person has a lot of knowledge about what Tawheed is and what the names and the attributes are of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala, what the actions of Allah are, and what is taught by the scholars in the history of Islam about this subject matter, and correct beliefs and beliefs about the prophets and so on and so forth, and these sorts of things, right? That this knowledge is on different levels. This knowledge connected to his belief and connected to the laws of Islam is on different levels. And according to those levels is the degree of the second thing, which is certainty that a person has, right? And how much the person will be spared from doubts and desires, right? And according to that, and it will be how much they accept it and how receptive they are. As we said, that another word for acceptance is receptiveness. And qabul and iqbal is the opposite of al-juhud wal-i'rad wa-taghalli. And the opposite of that is to turn away and to be disinterested. How interested a person is, his acceptance is how interested he is, and how much he accepts it, how much he is receptive to it, and that sort of thing. Right? That's the condition of his heart, right? And he likewise the trueness when he utters it, his compliance, and all these are on different levels, and they need to be fostered. They need to be fostered. They need to be inculcated. So we move on to the last condition of La ilaha illallah, which is not the end of the book because he has a section about the Shahada that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah, but we'll read through this section in the remainder of time that we have left now, which is not long. Hafid ibn Ahmed, the Alama Hafid ibn Ahmed ibn Ali al-Hakimi rahimahullah ta'ala, he said, السابع المحبة وهي أن يكون الله ورسوله أحب إليه مما سواهما وأن يحب في الله ويبغض في الله ويوالي في الله ويعادي في الله. Love. The last condition is love. Love is the last condition. And love is a description of how he complies. And he complies lovingly. Because a person can comply outwardly, right? They can do what is required of them and leave off what is forbidden from, what they are forbidden from, while hating what they are doing. While hating what they are doing and not loving what they are doing. We're not doing Allah a favor by being Muslims. Allah doesn't need us to be Muslims. Allah doesn't benefit from our Islam. Allah doesn't benefit from our guidance. If he was to turn away, يستبدل قوما غيركم ثم لا يكون أمثالكم. Allah said, إن تتولوا, if you turn away, يستبدل قوما غيركم. Allah just replace you with different people. ثم لا يكون أمثالكم. And they won't be like you. Then those people aren't going to be like you. Right? So, and a person does it lovingly. They do it out of love for Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala. The love of Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala is the most important action of the heart, and it is used interchangeably with inqiyad. Sometimes when the Salaf talk about the core of faith, instead of saying inqiyad, compliance, they say love. They say love. And love is closely connected to a concept that is at the core of inqiyad, which is ta'adhim. Ta'adhim, which is veneration and reverence for Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala. Recognition of Allah's reverence, and which is ta'adhim, is used interchangeably with another word, which is dhul, humility, which is used interchangeably with another word, al-khudu', which is subservience, which is used interchangeably with the word inqiyad, compliance. What caused you to comply is your awareness of the greatness of Allah and the greatness of the religion of Allah, and your awareness of this enormous favor that Allah has given you by guiding you to faith. So the more you know your religion, the more you will love your religion, the more you will enjoy your religion. That's the recipe for happiness. The more a person knows and actually knows, not just has collected data and information, so on and so forth, but actually has internalized and accepted and embraced what they know, and the more they will. As Ibn Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala, he said, Al-Mahabba in his book Al-Fawaid, he said, Al-Mahabba tatba'u al-ma'rifa. He said, Al-ladhatu tatba'u al-mahabba, wal-mahabbatu tatba'u al-ma'rifa. It's a very powerful statement. That ladha, that your pleasure and enjoyment of a thing is connected to your mahabba, your love of that thing, how much you love that thing. Anything that you enjoy is connected to how much you love that thing. وَالْمَحَبَّةَ تَتْبَعُ الْمَعْرِفَةِ. And your love of that thing is connected to your knowledge of that thing. There are reasons why you love what you love. There are reasons that you love your children. There are reasons that you love your parents. There are reasons that you love your wife. There are reasons that you love money. There are reasons that you love good food, right? The more you know of those reasons, the more you recognize of those reasons, the more you understand the benefit that you get from what you love, or the perceived benefit, because people, sometimes love things that are harmful, right? But according to a person's perception, and what they know of a thing or think that they know of a thing will be how much they love that thing, or why they love that thing, or why they think that they love that thing. And according to how much they love that thing will be how much they enjoy having that thing. And so a person enjoys their Islam according to how much they know their Islam. How much they know their Islam. And so love is a inseparable connection, inseparably connected description of inqiyad. The opposite of that is hating anything the Prophet ﷺ came with, hating anything from Islam. And the opposite of respecting, because love and respect are connected together, ta'zeem and hub are connected together. To the point that some of the scholars define worship as a combination of the two, the highest level of respect and veneration, and the highest level of love coupled together, right? That according to how much a person has of this love will be how safe their Islam is. It's going to be how safe their Islam is. So a person needs to learn their religion to love their religion. A person needs to learn their religion, to love their religion. We mentioned before, it's a hadith attributed to the Prophet ﷺ, great to be hasan by some of the scholars, and attributed at least as a statement of some of the early salaf by other scholars. He said, "Man human la yashba'an, man humun fil ilm, wa man humun fil dunya." There are two cravings that can never be satisfied. No matter how much you get of them, you can never have enough. A craving for this world, it was never satisfied. You'll never be able to have enough of this world. You'll never be satisfied in this. Whatever you have, you want more, right? And a craving for knowledge. And a craving for knowledge. Once a person has a craving and a thirst for knowledge, then they're insatiable. Their appetite is insatiable. They'll get more and more benefit. They'll love knowledge more and more. And they'll love the people of knowledge more and more. Even if they don't love to learn per se, the scholars of Islam, and they said, "Kun aliman, in lam tastati fakun muta'alliman." Be a scholar, a learned person. If you can't do that, then be a learner, a student. وَإِن لَمْ تَسْتَطِعْ فَلَا تُبْغِضْهُمَا. And if you can't be one of those two people, a person who is serious about learning or teaching, then at least don't hate those two people. And people all throughout the history of Islam, they're just regular, regular Joes, regular Amr and Zaids, and Muhammad and Ahmeds in the community, right? And they would come out in the hundreds or the thousands to sit in the gatherings of the Imams of the Sunnah, and they wouldn't be writing. They would just be watching. They would be there for the experience, to watch the character of the scholar, and to be there to get the barakah of the sitting, and so on and so forth, right? So not every person is going to be a scholar or a serious student of knowledge, but the more they know about Islam and the more they appreciate knowledge and what knowledge is and value knowledge and the people who are giving them that knowledge, then the more they'll love the religion and the more they'll love the best of the Muslims who are the scholars of Islam. That's why speaking against the scholars of Islam can go at the core of a person's faith and may even invalidate their faith. It might even invalidate their faith, as comes in the hadith of Auf ibn Malik al-Ashja'i, and that is found in the books of Sunnah, Sahih Muslim, I believe, and is elsewhere in the books of Sirah, that the well-known verses in Surah At-Tawbah, وَلَئِن سَأَلْتَهُمْ لَيَقُولُنَّ إِنَّمَا كُنَّا نَخُوضُ وَنَلْعَبُ. If you were to ask them, if you were to interrogate them, ask them of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, why they said what they said, they would say, we were only نَخُوضُ وَنَلْعَبُ, just passing the time with conversation and just joking around. What did they say? Auf ibn Malik, he was sitting amongst them, and he was a person who was beloved to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and this is during the Battle of Tabuk. This is during the expedition of Tabuk, if I recall correctly. I might be mistaken about that, actually. They said, if you were to ask them, then they would say, إِنَّمَا كُنَّا نَخُوضُ وَنَلْعَبُ. What did they say? That we're only joking. We're only joking. They said, مَا رَأَيْنَا مِثْلَ قُرَّائِنَا هَؤُلَاء. مَا رَأَيْنَا مِثْلَ قُرَّائِنَا هَؤُلَاء. We haven't seen anybody like these so-called scholars of ours. They said, Qurra. Qurra, reciters, is a word that the early generations used to describe Ahlul Ilm, the people of knowledge, because the core of knowledge is the Quran, recitation. A person wouldn't have learned the Quran without knowing the meanings of it, that sort of thing. So a person who is a reciter is a learned person. We haven't seen anybody like these learned people of ours. أرغب بطونا ولا أكذب ألسنا ولا أجبن عند لقاء. They describe them with three things. They said, who are greedier in their appetites, who are greater liars with their tongues, and who are more cowardly in meeting the enemy on the battlefield. Auf ibn Malik, he said, كذبت عدو الله ولكنك منافق. لأخبرن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم عما قلت. He said, you have lied, O enemy of Allah, but rather you are munafiq, meaning a person who is pretending to be a Muslim. I'm going to go and tell the Prophet ﷺ what you just said. I'm going to tell the Prophet ﷺ what you just said. This shows that there's an exception to namima, ani naql al-akhbar, if there is a maslaha, rajiha, if there is a greater good to warn against some serious detriment or harm, to alert an authority figure about serious detriment and harm. And by the time Auf ibn Malik got to the Prophet ﷺ, Allah had sent revelation telling the Prophet ﷺ what had happened before Auf got to him. And he said, it's like I could see the munafiq now hanging on to the side of the naqa, of the she-camel of the Prophet ﷺ, his feet were banging against the rocks, and the Prophet ﷺ was riding away, saying, إِنَّمَا كُنَا نَخُوضُ وَنَلْعَبُ. We were just laughing and joking and trying to pass the time. We didn't mean no harm. Allah said, قُلْ أَبِاللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ وَآيَاتِهِ وَرَسُولِهِ كُنْتُمْ تَسْتَحْزِئُونَ. Was it Allah and His ayat and His messengers that you were making fun of? Who were they making fun of? Who were they making fun of? The scholars from the Sahaba. We're making fun of the scholars from the Sahaba, mocking the scholars from the Sahaba. Was it them that you were making fun of? Was it them that you were mocking? Was it Allah and His ayat and His messenger? So what did Allah call the scholars? His ayat. The scholars are the ayat of Allah upon the earth. The scholars of the Sunnah, they are the ayat of Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala upon the earth. لا تعتذروا قد كفرتم بعد إيمانكم. Don't make excuses for yourself. You have disbelieved after your iman, after your faith. After professing faith, you have disbelieved. And so, love of Islam and the message of Islam and the scholars of Islam and the people of Islam is a condition of La ilaha illallah. Is a condition of La ilaha illallah. We love each other even if we can't stand each other. Sometimes not everybody is your friend. Everybody is your brother, but not everybody is your friend. The scholars like Ibn Juzay and Kalbi and others, they mentioned that there are different registers that you put people on who are Muslim. There's a register of the person who was Sadiq, the person who is your friend, who can be a confidant, so on and so forth. Right? And they said not even a person who is your friend can be your confidant. You have to be careful who you say and what you say it to and who you confide information in. You have to have a filter of what you say and who you say it to. Then there are some people who are ma'arif. Some people who are acquaintances. You're familiar with them. You know them. You've seen them around the way. Right? You know loosely about them and their family and their kids and so on and so forth. But you're not actual friends. You're just ma'arif. People that you're familiar with. You know their names. You're generally familiar with them. Then you have some people who are, even as Muslims, who are a'da, who are enemies. Every person on the face of the earth is going to have a dhid, is going to have opponents. You're going to have avdad. However, if a person has enmity towards you, and if a person treats you as an enemy, even if they are a Muslim, it is not permissible for you to oppress that person. You have to fear Allah and you have to pardon and forgive if that is what is warranted by the situation, or deal with it in a way that is wise, according to whatever the situation dictates. Right? But all these brothers are ikhwa. إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ ikhwa. All of these are your brothers. Right? There are different types of family. There are different types of families and different types of members in your families, right? You have the loving, compassionate people in your family, the caring people. The people are the pillars of the family, right? Everybody leans on them. Everybody leans on them, right? Mom is the orbit of the home. The uncle who has clout and who has influence and who keeps everybody together and who helps with skirmishes and so on and so forth. That person is a pillar of the family. If you was to lose him, it feels like the family falls apart, right? Some families are loving, some families are dysfunctional. But all these people are like kin to you. All these people are kin to you. The same is true about your brothers in faith. The same is true about your brothers in faith. The Prophet ﷺ, he said something tremendous when he said, يقول الله عز وجل, that Allah Almighty and Majestic said, المتحابون بجلالي اليوم أذلهم في ظلي يوم لا ظل إلا ظلي. Those who love one another because of my jalal. Those who love each other because of my jalal, meaning my adama, Allah says. Because of my majesty, my magnificence. Meaning that what causes them to love each other and put all their differences to the side is their belief in the greatness of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. It's not even about that person. It has little to do with that person. What causes you to love that person is how much they're upon Islam, how much they outwardly, because you only know what's outward from a person, right? How much they outwardly are upon istiqamah. What you see of their Islam, what you see outwardly of their goodness, that's what makes you love the person. And that love is not all the same. Our love for the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is not like our love for the Sahaba. Our love for the best of the Sahaba is not like our love for the least of the Sahaba. Our love for the scholars is not like our love for the random person in the community, right? And there are different levels of love according to the muqtadiyat, according to the causes of that love, and why you should love them, of what is apparent of their Islam, and what you know of goodness for them, and the good thoughts that you have about them. That is why the greatest thing that destroys the religion is the Muslims hating one another. Anything that causes the Muslims to hate one another, which could be sometimes sin and disobedience and oppression between each other. At other times, something is even worse than that, which is innovation. And people making wala and bara based upon warped interpretations of Islam. And then whoever doesn't believe what you believe and what your scholars believe, and their perversion of the meanings of the text and their rejecting of the attributes of Allah or the rights of Allah, tabarak wa ta'ala, things that are from the core of belief, that they oppose those matters, then they deem everybody who disagrees with them to be outside of the fold of Islam sometimes, or to be evil and wicked people at other times, and they make tanfir of them, and they run other people away from them, and they use alqab munafira, and they slander and they lie and so on and so forth and misrepresent the facts. Innovations are the greatest thing, and kufr and shirk and innovation are the greatest thing to divide the people, because the only thing that can unite the people is tawheed and sunnah. Tawheed and Sunnah, and then good character and good conduct, and so on and so forth. So when the Muslims oppress one another and hate one another and violate the rights of one another, then they are doing the handiwork of the shaitan. Unless that hatred is for the sake of Allah Ta'ala, because it is agreed upon by the scholars that the people of falsehood and the people of innovation, the people of wickedness, they are to be ostracized and they are to be hated for the sake of Allah Ta'ala. But a person should make sure that they are actually hating for the sake of Allah, and it's not just a us and them type thing, and it's not a matter. It's a matter based upon knowledge and justice and proper decorum, right? And it's not a matter based upon emotions and feelings and that sort of thing, but it is something that is actually based on tangible, actual facts. It is not permissible to oppress anybody. It's not permissible to oppress anybody. You see this sometimes when a person is weak in their knowledge as a student or weak in their knowledge as a lay person, and they may speak about some of the groups of innovation, and they'll say things about some callers, about some people. I mean, that which has no basis. They'll just make things up about people, right? They just make things up about people. Make sure that you understand that the reason that you dislike another person, if they are a Muslim and they are a person of innovation or a person of wickedness, is because you want the good for them like you want it for yourself. That's a statement of Abdurrahman al-Mu'allimi rahimahullah ta'ala, who died around the same time as the Shaykh Asadi and Hafiz al-Hakami here, the author of these words. And that your reason that you hate others for the sake of Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala, he said in his big book about ibadah and Raf al-Ishtibah, he said that the reason that you hate them is because you love the good for them. You love the good for them. If you have a mother who's a disbeliever, you love the good for her, right? You hate what she's upon for the sake of Allah, and you have natural love for her, but you have a natural hatred for her, or you have a religious hatred or disdain. Like sometimes when you use words in English, they sound really bad. You use the word hate, and it's like, ooh, not hate. Did you know what hate literally means in English? It means strong dislike. Strongly dislike another person. That's all that hate means, right? Sometimes people get, worked up about, linguistics or learn about semantics rather, and the way the words are used. But it's a non-Muslim family member, a non-Muslim parent, right? It's difficult, but you have to hate them for the sake of Allah, dislike them for the sake of Allah. Why? He said, because you love the good for them and they don't love it for themselves. You love this for them. You love this Islam for them. If you truly hated them for the sake of Islam, for the sake of Allah, because you love the good for them, then you will probably use good character and wisdom and learn your religion to teach them and so on and so forth. That will manifest itself as you being the best person that they could ever be around, right? They would think from your behavior that you had a higher degree of love for them than anybody else connected to them. If you truly hated for the right reasons. If you truly hated for the right reasons. So it's very important to understand these concepts, and that our love and our hate is for the sake of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. Yani this is the third of the three fundamentals. If Islam is built upon sincerity and worship for Allah, which is Tawheed, and worshiping Allah according to what the Prophet ﷺ came with, which is Sunnah, then the third principle that Islam is built around is loving and hating for the sake of Allah. We love the people of Tawheed and Sunnah and righteousness, and we hate, strongly dislike, the people of the opposite of that. What's the opposite of Tawheed and Iman and Sunnah and righteousness? They're people of Shirk and Kufr, and the people of Bid'ah, and the people of wickedness, right? Now, all those people are on the same level. You don't hate the innovator in the same way that you hate the innovator who is outwardly still in the religion, in the same way that you hate the disbeliever, because his evil is less. Although his harm is more, his evil, his actual what he is upon is less. The harm of it is worse, though. Why? Well, the innovations are seen to be Islam, and opposing them is seen to be opposing Islam, and the innovator is not going to repent from that innovation. He's going to hate people of Sunnah. He's going to hate the Sunnah that opposes innovation. He's going to say about those texts, as Ibn Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala, he said, describing the munafiqs from the people of innovation, that when they hear a text that goes against their innovation, they say laytahu lam yarid. If only that had never been revealed. If only that had never been reported. That's something that is difficult for them to accept. It's difficult for them to just outright reject it. So they can't outright reject it because that would make them a kafir. So they have to say that it doesn't mean that. That's not what you think. It's not what you think that really means that, but it really doesn't mean that, right? And so the point here being that after Tawheed and Sunnah, which is the meaning of La ilaha illallah, Muhammad Rasulullah, the third most important principle that all of Islam is built upon, as we find in the book, Usul Thalatha. And one of the introductory sections is love and hate for the sake of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. Loving and hate, al-wala' wal-bara' ala al-usul. Love and hate based upon the foundations of Islam. Based upon the foundations of Islam. And so that's not all on one level. The sinful person, the oppressive person. It might be a person who is upon Sunnah and Salafiyya and Istiqamah and so on and so forth. But they're a mujrim, athim, dhalimun, rashum. They're a person who is a terrible person, awful person, an oppressor, a scandalous snake, right? That person there, Salafiyya is even questionable, right? You know, Salafiyya, to say they're upon the way of the Salaf, that's a big statement. That'd be like saying a person is a mu'min. If Iman is all of Islam, right? That's why the Salaf would say, I'm a mu'min, inshallah. Meaning the core of Iman, I have that which is tasdeeq and inqiyad. But as for Iman, that's all of Islam. Am I doing all of Islam? Inshallah, I'm trying my best, right? You know, that goes back to that issue. I'm a mu'min, inshallah. So you say about a person who, and he was struggling, and they're Salafi, or they're trying, right? That person, they yantasib, that person ascribes to Salafiyya, but that person, his oppressiveness and his wrongness and her evil and her scheming and so on and so forth, right? Because, women do it too, right? Women can be foul too, right? That person is still not like the people of innovation, like the kuffar, right? We have to make sure that our love and our hate is in the same place. But this shows you, that this awesome of loving for the sake of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala and putting our personal differences aside and to the end of it, is at the core of Islam. It is at the core of Islam, as the Prophet ﷺ said, "Inna shaytana qad ayasa an ya'budahu al-musallun fi jazirat al-arab walakin fi at-tahrishi baynahum." The shaitan has despaired, has lost any hope that those who perform their prayers in the Arabian Peninsula, which is where the Muslims, the Ummah was at that time, would ever worship him. And ya'budahu al-musallun. Shaitan has lost any hope, because the worship of anything besides Allah is worship of shaitan, as Allah said, as Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala, He said, "Alam ahid ilaykum ya bani Adam, Allah ta'bud shaitan." Have I not taken a covenant from you, O sons of Adam, that you do not worship the shaitan? Innahu lakum aduwwun mubin. And as Ibrahim said to his father, Ya abati la ta'bud shaitan. Oh my father, don't worship the shaitan. Don't worship the shaitan. Anything that is worship besides Allah is devil worship. Flat out. flat out. So the Prophet ﷺ is saying here, the shaitan has lost any hope of being worshipped by those who perform their salat in the Arabian Peninsula. He's lost any hope of them ever making shirk, because shirk is double worship, right? وَلَكِنْ فِي التَّحْرِيشِ بَيْنَهُمْ. However, his tama', what he hopes to accomplish amongst you, is to make you hate one another. Make you hate one another. إلقاء يعني إيقاء الخصوم والخشونة بينهم, and to cause hatred and malice between them and disputation amongst them, and to cause them أن يتدابروا وتباغضوا, to hate one another, to turn their backs on one another, to abandon one another, and so on and so forth. That is غاية أمنيته. That is the greatest hope of the shaitan, is to cause people of truth and people of Islam and people of Sunnah and people of Salafiyah to hate one another and turn on one another and turn their backs on one another. And so a person strives against that, and a person works hard against that. And they seek refuge with Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala from the nazaghat of shaitan, and from the nazar of the shaitan. And he quotes two verses here. The first is a statement of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala, after he says, وَأَنْ يُحِبَّ فِي اللَّهِ وَيُبْغِضَ فِي اللَّهِ وَيُوَالِي فِي اللَّهِ وَيُعَادِي فِي اللَّهِ. And he loves for the sake of Allah, he hates for the sake of Allah. He has muwala, love, and he takes allies for the sake of Allah, and he has enmities for the sake of Allah, and he has enmity for the sake of Allah. Allah Ta'ala, he said, وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَأَشَدُّ حُبًّا لِلَّهِ. And that those who believe have greater love for Allah. They love Allah more than the mushrikun love their andad, and he love the rivals that they have taken for Allah. وقال الله تعالى يا أيها الذين آمنوا من يرتد منكم عن دينه فسوف يأتي الله بقوم يحبهم ويحبونه أذلة على المؤمنين عزة على الكافرين. Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala, likewise, he said, O you who believe, whoever of you apostates from his religion, turns away from his religion, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will soon bring about another people who will love him, and who will be loved by, who he will love and who will love him, who will be humble with the believers. أَعِزَّةٍ عَلَى الْكَافِرِينَ, strong and mighty against the disbelievers. قال الله تعالى, and Allah said, لا تجد قوما يؤمنون بالله واليوم الآخر يوادون من حاد الله ورسوله. Let there not be found a people who believe in Allah and the last day, who have mawadda, yuwadun, who love, who have affinity and love for those had Allah wa Rasulah, who oppose Allah and the Messenger, and who go against Allah and the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. وَلَوْ كَانُوا آبَاءَهُمْ أَوْ أَبْنَاءَهُمْ أَوْ إِخْوَانَهُمْ أَوْ عَشِيرَتَهُمْ. Even if they are their fathers or parents, even if they are their children, even if they are their brothers or sisters, even if they are their tribe or their extended family. فوصف الله تعالى عباده المؤمنين بأنهم أشد حبا لله. So Allah here has described the believers as being stronger in their love for Allah and what Allah loves, and for each other, and so on and so forth, than the disbelievers. وأنهم يحبهم ويحبونه, and that He loves them and they love Him. وأنهم لا يوادون من حاد الله ورسوله ولا يتولوهم, and that they do not love those that oppose Allah and the Prophet ﷺ, and they don't have alliance or affinity for them. Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala, He said, وَمَن يَتَوَلَّهُ مِنكُمْ فَإِنَّهُ مِنْهُمْ. Whoever of you shows love for them, has tawalli for them, and whoever of you takes them as allies, and indeed he is one of them. Indeed he is one of them. Indeed he is one of them. And a person loves those that he loves, and he, because of who they are. And what makes a person, what is the identity of a person, more than what they love and what they believe. A person's beliefs and their ambitions and their love identify who they are, and their character identifies who they are. And so if you take an ally, a person who is a person of falsehood, a person of disbelief, a person of innovation, a person of wickedness, a person of etc., any all that can be said here, then you have rubber stamped that person. You have rubber stamped that person. You have said that this person is somebody that you obviously feel comfortable with them. There's a difference between that and what is called mudara, which is soft diplomacy. Soft diplomacy is different than mudahana, which is compromising and watering down one's religion. But a person treats people with kindness and smiles with people and deals with them with wisdom and so on and so forth. Doesn't chase people away to the end of it. And that doesn't require that a person uses flattery or says something that's not in his heart, because that's mudahana, that's compromising the religion. But that a person uses kindness, and that they treat people well, to the point that a person will think that they are somebody who is near or dear to you, or something of the sort, right? Because of your good treatment of them. And that's just from wisdom and diplomacy. And that was the method of the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the method of the righteous scholars and the rulers in the history of Islam, of inviting people to Islam and using wisdom and so on and so forth. طيب. وفي الصحيح عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم, likewise in the Sahih from the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم, he said, ثلاث من كنا فيه وجد حلاوة الإيمان وجد بهن حلاوة الإيمان. No wording of Sahih Muslim. There are three things, whoever has them will taste the sweetness of faith. أن يكون الله ورسوله أحب إليه مما سواهما. That Allah and the Prophet ﷺ are more loved to him than anything else, anyone else. وأن يحب المرء لا يحبه إلا لله. That he loves those he loves only for the sake of Allah. وأن يكره أن يعود في الكفر كما يكره أن يقذف في النار. That he hates to return back to kufr, just like he would hate to be thrown in the fire. These narrations should be memorized and understood and studied in more detail. This concludes the 7 conditions of La ilaha illallah, that are the elaboration of the core of faith, the bare minimum, what it requires for a person to be a believer. A person must have knowledge of why La ilaha illallah, why Muhammad Rasulullah, what that means, what they are negating, what they are affirming. They must have certainty of it, which comes by way of detailed knowledge and acting upon Islam. Because the more a person acts upon Islam, the more they will feel the effects of that in their life and have the full experience Islam provides to the person, and the more it will cement their connection to the faith, and the more they will accept it, and the more they will comply with it, and the more sincerity they will have in doing that. The most important sincerity is to leave off worship of anything besides Allah, and then just generally that person's statements and actions are done completely for the sake of Allah. The more they will be genuine and true and determined and excited about their religion, and the more love that they will have. Each of these concepts individually, quite literally, a great detail has been written about throughout the writings of the scholars in the history of Islam. And as the author, he says at the end of this book that we'll come to probably next week, inshallah ta'ala, that the evidence that are brought here, they are just a drop in the ocean. Otherwise, what can be mentioned all throughout the Quran and the Sunnah, tasrihan wa talmihan, are mentioned directly and indirectly about these 7 conditions being at the core of faith, and they are more than they can be counted. هذا وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.